Welcome to the COBB Tuning Lowering Spring Installation Guide for the Ford Focus ST. Before we get started, you should have a 15 and 18 mm wrench, spring compressor, 6, 8, 10, 13 and 15, and 17 mm deep sockets, and a ratchet. You should have the springs pictured here. We'll start by safely jacking the car up. After we've got the car in the air, remove the wheels and then remove the ABS sensor. Remove the 8 mm brake line bolt. Tuck the line out of the way. Use a 17 mm open-end wrench for the flat spots on the back of the sway bar end link and the 15 mm deep socket for the front. Loosen the bolt and then remove the OEM damper box. Remove the upper end link. Remove the 15 mm spindle bolt. Remove the 15 mm spindle bolt. Use a piece of scrap metal and the factory 15 mm bolt to spread the spindle apart enough so that we can free the strut body. It doesn't have to be this particular piece of scrap metal, any flat piece of metal will do. What we're doing is we're using the bolt to exert a bit of leverage to force the spindle apart enough so that we can get the shock body off. Loosen the two 13 mm upper strut mount bolts. Pull down on the hub to separate the strut body. Have a friend help you for this step. Push down on the hub while pulling up on the strut to release it. Hold the strut and then remove the 13 mm upper strut bolts. Remove the strut assembly and set it aside. Now we'll need our spring compressors. Compress the OEM springs with a set of spring compressors. Remove the top hat bolt. Hold the center 6 mm hex socket and then turn with the 18 mm box wrench. Remove the top hat, bump stop, boot, and spring, but leave the rubber lower isolator and blue cap in place on the strut. Separate the spring and the strut. Remove the boot and the bump stop from the strut. Remove the spring compressors from your stock springs. Now compress the COBB springs so we can install them. Install the COBB spring onto the strut. Be sure that the spring seats into the groove on the strut. Install the new dust boot onto the strut. Install the new bump stop over the boot onto the strut piston. Thread the top hat nut onto the strut. Hold the center 6mm hex and then turn with an 18mm box wrench to reinstall and tighten the top hat nut. Now we'll remove the spring compressors from the COBB springs. Guide the COBB spring and strut assembly into position. Have a friend help again for this step. Hold the strut in position and reinstall the 13mm upper strut bolts. Mount the lower end of the strut onto the wheel hub. Remove the 15mm bolt and the piece of scrap we used as a wedge earlier. Use a jack to gently support the strut to ensure it's fully seated. Reinstall and tighten the 15mm lower strut bolt. Reinstall the brake line bolt. Reconnect the front sway bar Endlink, making sure that we reinstall the damper box as well. Thread the nut onto the Endlink stud. Reinstall and tighten the sway bar end link using a 17mm open-end wrench and a 15mm deep socket. Reconnect the ABS sensor. Then reinstall the front wheel, and that's it for the front. Now we'll move to the back. Now jack up the rear of the car and remove the rear wheel. Use a jack under the rear lower control arm to compress the rear spring. Remove the 15mm lower control arm bolt. Slowly lower the jack to release the spring pressure. Now just pull down on the control arm and remove the OEM rear spring. It should just come right out. Now guide the COBB rear springs into place. Be sure that the spring seats into the notch in the control arm. Once again, use the jack under the lower control arm to compress the spring and align the bolt holes. Reinstall the 15mm lower control arm bolt. And that's it. The COBB lowering springs for the Focus ST drop the car an inch in the front and 1.1 inches in the rear. These progressive rate springs feature a rate of 154 to 194 in the front and 171 to 217 in the rear. This offers benefits such as enhanced handling, a lower center of gravity, and it looks pretty nice too. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.